Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 16th in a series of conversations about thinking differently, sponsored by the Center for Innovation here at Mayo Clinic. Our goal in this series of conversations is to get you to take a different perspective in thinking about things that are in front of us than you might be accustomed to. Mayo Clinic, as a large healthcare organization, exists in an environment where there are lots of changes coming and the potential for significant disruption. Indeed, just this week, Stanford Healthcare announced it's entering 5 more countries internationally, now having a footprint that's larger internationally than Mayo Clinic. And Apple announced this week for the second time that it will allow people to import their electronic health record to their iPhone. And there are 12 partners with Apple for that project. Mayo is not one of them. Now, if you think about the threats and the opportunities for a large company like Mayo, think a little bit about IBM. Interestingly, last fall at our Transform conference, Professor Clayton Christensen from Harvard University, author of The Innovator's Dilemma, Innovator's Prescription, and a key theorist in the development of the theory of disruptive innovation, came to talk to us, and he reminded us about a company some of you might remember, Digital Equipment Corporation, a company maybe somewhat like IBM, once thought to be really too well managed and too large to ever fail. It has disappeared. So today I'm pleased to welcome to Mayo Clinic, welcome back actually, Mr. Doug Powell. Doug is a distinguished designer at IBM. He leads the design practice for IBM in Austin, Texas. He's had a distinguished career in design spanning more than 2 decades. He's been recognized around the world as an innovative thinker in the application of design thinking. And he's going to share with us today some of his experiences in that regard. He's been an invited speaker at presentations around the world. He's been very sought after in terms of being able to share his thinking and the concept of design thinking with people who are not design thinkers or not designers. And he's been remarkably effective in creating a culture of design at IBM that is really helping to reinvent the company. His contributions have been recognized by many, and his peers have actually recognized his contributions by electing him president of the AIGA, which is the largest professional organization and the oldest professional organization of designers in the nation. So we're particularly pleased that he would come here today and share his experiences at IBM, reinvention at scale, how you actually transform a company to be successful in the face of any and all challenges. So he's going to begin with a presentation, and a little bit later we'll sit down together and be happy to take comments from you or take your questions. So Doug, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wood. That was a generous introduction. It's great to be here, and what Dr. Wood did not mention is that I'm a native Minnesotan, so I'm always glad to be able to return to Minnesota, and I've had various connections over my career with Mayo and the Center for Innovation here. So lots of connections, and really pleased to be here. Yesterday we had a chance to bring some of our design and design thinking team from the IBM Rochester campus over to meet with the CFI design team here. We had a great exchange, and what I'm struck by is how many similarities there are between the two organizations, Mayo Clinic and IBM. Both organizations well over 100 years old, and operating at a global scale in very different domains. While IBM has a very strong focus on healthcare, we really work across domains and across industries. So I want to talk about how we transform organizations that aren't built for transformation. And I think it's safe to say that on many levels, any organization that is more than a century old, has some aspects to it that make transformation or disruption really, really challenging. And IBM and Mayo Clinic, I think I'm guessing many of us can agree, have a lot of those types of embedded cultural and systemic challenges that make the answer to this question a really puzzling one. So this is sort of the thesis of my remarks today, and I'm going to kind of use the term design and innovation somewhat interchangeably. I know they're not, but just for the sake of my own script and my own expediency and the conversation itself, we'll kind of interchange those to a degree, and I'll do my best to explain when I'm how I'm using them. In fact, we'll start with a little clarification of a couple of terms that I'll come back to frequently in my remarks. And the first one is design, and how do we define design at IBM, and who exactly does design? I like to use this definition. Design is the discipline and craft of envisioning and creating great human experiences. So important words here are discipline and craft, of course, with a focus on the human experience. All of us are skilled in the discipline and craft of something that we do in our professional life. And for most of us, we've been formally trained in some way to do that discipline and craft. In the case of design, those people are designers, okay? Formally trained designers. And we're very careful at IBM to clarify that design is something that is done by a formally trained designer. What we've discovered over the last couple of decades is that the way that designers solve problems with this focus on the human experience is actually really useful when you apply it in various ways. And there are aspects of that approach that when taken out of a design setting can be very useful to anyone solving a complex problem. And so this notion of thinking like a designer, or design thinking, has really emerged in the last 15 to 20 years as a practice, as a way of addressing complex problems. So what's the difference then between design and design thinking? Well, here's our crack at defining design thinking: the collaborative and inclusive way for cross-disciplinary teams to address complex problems with a human focus. So similarity here to the previous definition is human focus, human experience, okay? That's consistent. But with design thinking, as opposed to the practice of design, where we've got formally trained designers, here we've got a collaborative and inclusive way. Okay, those are the important key words here: collaboration and inclusion, and cross-disciplinary. How can we get as many different points of view as possible to contribute to this problem that we are trying to address? So yes, designers participate in design thinking and often lead that activity, but it's important for us to have our partners in whatever project we're working on, our stakeholders, our clients. This is a word that I don't like, but it's a word that we've sort of inherited in the tech industry. Our users, the people who use our products and services. In your world, you might think patients. So just to kind of map out for us as we get into the discussion here, the difference between design and design thinking, at least how we define it at IBM. Design thinking looks a lot like this in our world. A lot of these sticky notes, a lot of very crude drawings and scratchy notes, a lot of mapping out of experiences, a lot of what I would call low fidelity artifacts that become very important as you accumulate them, as you're trying to understand the condition, the human condition that you're building a better experience for. This is what it looks like in our studio in Austin. This is a very common scene that you'll find, and actually this picture tells a great story about design thinking and our practice of it. There's one designer in this picture, the woman in the middle of the frame here. Everyone else in the picture is a non-designer, and you can see what they've done here. They've built these prototypes of the idea that they are working on. It took them about an hour or so to go from an idea to scratching it out in a really rough way on paper, building this prototype. They literally poked their head out into the hallway and said, "Hey, you, Josh, come on in here. Take a look at this prototype and let us know what you think." That whole cycle took about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. They then took that data, that input that they got from Josh, and they started over again. And they made another prototype a half hour later. And that is the loop that we refer to as design thinking. It's really not any more complicated than that. And this is a scene that we see playing out in our facilities over and over again. And it's a scene that we really love to encourage. So IBM, what exactly does IBM do? IBM, as Dr. Wood mentioned, is one of the most established and enduring companies in the world, with a 106-year history. There's no other company really like IBM. We have 360,000 people. We have a presence in 170 countries. We're experts in every scientific, technical, and business domain. And we apply that expertise to change the way our clients work. Indeed, to change the way the world works. Historically, the user of IBM technology has been a very technical person. Someone like a technical administrator, someone who's managing a big technical system, an engineer, very deeply trained technical expert. But what's happened more recently, in the last decade or so, is that the users of our technology have become less and less technical. Developers, data scientists, nurses, small business owners. And this has required us to think differently about how we build great experiences for them. The expectation of a small business owner for the user experience they will have with the technology that they use in their work is very different than the deeply trained engineer. So that requires us as a company to be thinking very differently about how we build those experiences. If you know anything about the history of IBM, you know that design is not a new thing. This is, for our company, this is Thomas J. Watson, Jr., the chairman and CEO of IBM in the middle of the 20th century, who was a real visionary in the application and connection of design and business in that era. He assembled a constellation of some of the most iconic designers of the 20th century around IBM at that time. Elliot Noyes, Paul Rand, Charles and Ray Eames. Eros Saarinen, in fact, designed the Rochester IBM campus, among many other IBM facilities. This is one of the artifacts from our corporate archives that I really love to see on a big screen like this. It's really fun to reflect back on, and you can look at the date here, December 20th, 1966. This is a memo that Watson Jr. sent to his senior leaders now more than 50 years ago. And you can see the first line of the memo here. Good design is good business. That now ubiquitous phrase that was originated by Watson Jr. And this is, in fact, the first instance that we have of Watson Jr. using the phrase "good design is good business." He was really just an eloquent and compelling and passionate advocate for the connection of design and business at a time when really no other leaders of corporate design, global corporations were thinking that way. Of course, at that time, IBM was making, among other things, typewriters, and that is since then we've transformed ourselves, at least in what we make, many times over, from a maker of physical hardware to a maker of software and services, and now to a company that's really got a deep focus on cloud and cognitive computing, or artificial intelligence. So let's fast forward to our current CEO, who took her role. Ginny Rometty took her role as CEO at the very end of 2011. And this was a very interesting outtake from her opening statement as CEO of IBM back in 2012. There's one key to our future growth, says Ginny Rometty, the client experience. That's for me, a very surprising thing for a corporate CEO to be saying in the year 2012, talking about the human experience, okay? Really saying that the client experience, the experience that people have with our company, with our people, with our products, our services, our spaces, our brand, that experience is going to drive the company in the future. That is a notion that, according to this Gardner study from a couple of years ago, is very common among corporate leaders who, by a score of 89%, agree that they believe customer experience will be the primary basis for competition moving forward. So customer experience has become elevated in the priority of our biggest companies and organizations. Well, Ginny Rometty had a dilemma in 2012, because at that time there weren't a lot of designers at IBM, and designers, as we've established, are the experts in creating human experience, great human experiences. At that time, there were a couple hundred designers at IBM, and a company at the time of roughly 400,000 people. Those aren't good odds if you're one of those designers to be doing great, successful work. And so Ginny at that time made a big investment in design and design thinking at IBM, and she launched a new division for the company called IBM Design, based in Austin, Texas, where I live and work now. This was the mission that she set for IBM Design, to create a sustainable culture of design and design thinking at IBM. That's a pretty ambitious mission for a new part of the company, to really change the culture, the way that the company behaves and is in the world. That's pretty ambitious, and that ambition and audacity and vision is really one of the reasons why I was so inspired to join the company 5 years ago, as IBM Design was launched. So how do we do that? How do we change the culture of a 100-year-old company? Well, for us, we broke that down into three pillars: people plus places plus practices. We believe if we get those three things right, that it'll lead to great outcomes for IBM, for our clients, for our users. Let me tell you a little bit about what we've done in each of these three areas. First, with people, those formally trained designers that I was talking about earlier, and how important they are as the sort of the root of any great design and design thinking program. We've now added 1,600 formally trained designers to the company. a company now of 360,000 people. The odds are still not in our favor, but we're getting there, right? This number was really, we determined that between 1,500 and 2,000 new designers would be the requirement, really, to get the ratio of designers to engineers at IBM to a healthy balance. And so that's why we've arrived at this number. And we expect that to be sort of a steady state number for the company for the foreseeable future. Importantly, these designers are not organized in a centralized function. Instead, virtually all of these designers are distributed throughout the company and working within each of our business units. So that's an important thing when you think back to the mission of culture change. And if that mission is a culture of design and design thinking, the carriers of that culture are going to be these 1,600 designers. So isolating those designers in a separate part of the organization was going to be a barrier to culture change. So it was important for us to structure our program in a decentralized way. What about places? Well, in 2012, we did not have any places that were built for designers to do their work. We now have 44 IBM studios around the world. Austin, Texas is our home-based studio. We have about 300 designers working in our Austin studio. And importantly, virtually all of these 44 studios are built on existing IBM campuses, so in existing facilities. Again, important when you think about culture change that we are not locating the designers in separate spaces, that we're putting them closely in touch with the rest of the company. Again, they are the carriers of the culture. Let's put them as close as we can to the rest of the company. This is a shot from our Austin studio, where you can see how we sort of built this space to be used for that deeply collaborative activity of design thinking. These suspended whiteboards from a tracking system in the ceiling allow us to reconfigure this space in a matter of minutes for the purposes of different teams that are using them on different parts of a day or a week. That is the express intent of this space, is to be completely modular and completely changeable in virtually a matter of minutes. Our approach, our practice of design thinking is really very simple. It's based on these three activities: observe, reflect, and make. And we intentionally simplified our practice down to this level so that our teams could adopt the practice very quickly and easily. We didn't want to overcomplicate design thinking to the point where people would just have a hard time understanding it. I showed you the picture a few moments ago. That team was observing what they were seeing from Josh, their proxy user. They were taking a moment to reflect on that and synthesize their observations, and then 10 minutes later they were making again. And when they finished that, they were back in the loop. We use this mental model, this metaphor of the infinite loop as a reference point for that, and it's become a very successful idea for us to talk about at the scale of our vast company. We also have an online learning platform that we just launched last year, a way for those non-designers at IBM, those 358,000 some non-designers who are very important to that culture change mission. For them to have some understanding of design and design thinking is going to be very important for us. So now we have more than 100,000 IBMers who have taken their entry-level online training for design thinking and have become certified as design thinkers. So again, working at scale. How do we touch as many people as we can in a large global company? But so what? So what? 1,600 designers, 44 studios, 100,000, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter unless we can create great outcomes. Unless all of that comes together to mean something, unless we can make great experiences for the people that we're using for. So I want to tell you a quick story about a project that I think will illustrate how design thinking and designers are really driving meaningful change in our company. It's a project that we call Project Monocle. It's not a sexy project. It's not the kind of project, the kind of case study that you're going to see on a TV commercial on the US Open for IBM. But it's, I think, one that really illustrates how our designers and how design thinking is influencing our company and its core. It comes from, Project Monocle comes from our power systems business, and this is our mainframe business. This is the big storage units hardware business that is one of our legacy businesses. And the person that we're concerned with in this case is a person we call Jack, who is a lead systems admin. Jack's job is to oversee a big facility of many of these hardware units, and these hardware units are they are storing our data, right? Storing our financial data, our medical data. This is really important stuff, and if something goes wrong with this facility, it's a bad day for Jack. We're also concerned with Jack's boss, who we're calling Jill. Jill is overseeing many of these facilities and many Jacks at the same time. Now, Jack has something that he needs to do on a regular basis, and that is to upgrade the operating system, essentially, for his server facility. And that is something that we do with our laptop computers and our phones and on a regular basis. So the idea of upgrading our operating system is something that we're all familiar with. For Jack, that involves a kind of comical amount of manual work that he has to do on an Excel spreadsheet to transfer numbers from one sheet to another. It's a very cumbersome, very manual process that is fraught with, as you can imagine, opportunity for error. So it's a very stressful process for Jack. Well, our technical team on Project Monocle were inspired by how easy it is for us to upgrade the operating system on our phones. We basically push a button and say, yes, please upgrade my operating system, and it happens, right? That easy. And they thought, well, that's what we need to do for Project Monocle. We need a single-click upgrade. In fact, that was the brief that our technical leadership gave to our design team when they started Project Monocle. We want a single-click upgrade for this software. And our design team took this brief and did what any good design team does. They went out and they found their users. They found the Jacks and the Jills, and they started asking questions and interviewing Jack and learning more about the experience that he was having in this very complicated process of upgrading his operating system. Here's what Jack said. He said, the most difficult thing for me is to get information, to see all the pieces and how they belong together so I can properly plan. Okay, so he's saying this is complicated, and I need to do a lot of planning before I can do this upgrade. He also said, what should I do next? Is this the right patch? Are we exposed? He's confused, he's anxious, he's nervous. Is this going to go right? Trying to schedule upgrades is like pulling teeth. What we're seeing here is a lot of anxiety. We're seeing a lot of concern. We're not seeing Jack say, you know what I need? I need to be able to do this with one click. That's one thing that we weren't seeing from Jack. What were we hearing from Jill? Jill was saying managing a diverse environment can be difficult. Getting all the right people to agree can take forever. Again, lots of concern, but nothing here about a single click. We saw a bunch of pain points. It's overly complicated. It takes too much time. There's a lack of visibility. I'm not able to see all the pieces that I need to see at the same time. There's a lack of confidence. It's not easy to share. These were all of the inputs that our design team took as they started prototyping a new experience for Jack. From a low fidelity sketch to a clickable prototype, and ultimately to an experience for Jack that is vastly improved over the Excel spreadsheet he was dealing with before. Now Jack's able to plan his upgrades. He's able to see what other facilities are doing at the same time so that he can account for them. And ultimately, he's able to deliver his plan to Jill on her mobile device so that she can approve it anywhere at any time from her phone. So a vastly improved experience for our user through some very core and very simple questions asked by our design team. This is what our users and clients of Monocle are saying now. It was everything and a little more than I was hoping. We're chomping at the bit to get Project Monocle, to start using it, and to help it be successful. No matter what your job is, no matter what you are working on a daily or weekly basis, this is the kind of feedback that you want for the work that you're doing. This is the design team for Project Monocle based in Austin. And they did some heroic work on this project. They really changed the course of a very expensive and very important project for the company. But I'll tell you, there's another hero in the project here. It's this guy right here. His name is Carl Burnett. He was the lead technical architect for Project Monocle. He was the one who said, we need the single-click upgrade. And Carl, you can see here in this design thinking workshop early in the project, he wasn't quite sure about design thinking. He was kind of hanging back a little bit, like, I don't know about this. But let's listen to what Carl had to say at the end of Project Monocle.
For me, the aha moment was when we had one of the first workshops and we started pulling together the user research. And it clearly demonstrated how the original thought of what we felt needed to be built was not the right path, and that the actual pain points were something different. It had such an impact on me that I pulled members from our development team over into the workshop so they could read these little cue cards, right, that the user research team had collected with all of these comments from customers and business partners. And it was very clear how taking that feedback into consideration gives you insights that you would have never had otherwise.
Carl Burnett is starting to talk like a designer, and I've seen this dozens of times, and it still kind of gives me goosebumps because Carl's been transformed, right? He has been changed by this experience. Now, back to my original question: how do we transform large, established companies and organizations? You've got to find the Carl Burnett, right? And you've got to reach out to Carl, and you've got to earn the trust of Carl, and you then can be in a position to change the way he thinks, change his point of view, and ultimately he will become a great champion for the disruption that you are trying to move toward. That's certainly what Carl has become in our world, and we are looking for the Carls in IBM as actively as we can, because they are very important to answering this question of transformation in established organizations. We have this mantra at IBM, empathy first with each other, then with our users. that empathy that that our designers had to have for Carl and his technical team as they were given this brief that didn't make sense to them, the single-click upgrade. They really had to form some bonds and form some trust with the technical leadership that allowed them then to propose their new idea.
I hope we'll see in IBM is that our engineers actually start to think like designers.
Yes. That's my big exclamation point. Just a few closing comments here. In her kickoff remarks to our company just a couple of days ago, Ginny Rometty talked a lot about accelerate. Her point of view is, hey, we've transformed as a company. Now it's time for us to move fast. And we've got to accelerate. And one thing that we hear about design thinking is, oh, we can't do that because it takes too long. And what's interesting is that we are now, and I know that from this is taken from the wall up at the CFI workspace. I know that that's an important priority for the Mayo Clinic and for the healthcare industry as well. We all need to be moving fast. As Dr. Wood said in his opening, the world is moving at a blinding speed now, and disruption is happening, and we need to be moving faster. We are just getting, and I'll ask you for a couple of slides here to not take pictures of the screen here, because I want to tease some data that we're getting from a new report that Forrester Research is just about to report. They're going to publish this in about 3 weeks, at which point it'll be out in the world and you can reference it. But I want to give you a couple of previews to it. What they're finding in this, and it's a total economic impact report of our design thinking practice. So they've really studied how design thinking impacts not just the user experience. We know that we can make great user experiences, but the economic value of that activity and that practice. What they're finding is that through design thinking, our teams are reducing the time at the beginning of a project to gather and finalize the requirements by 75%, shaving the time to gather and finalize requirements by 75%. Then, moving forward into the development part of a project, a design thinking team, a team that has the right balance of designers, that's practicing design thinking at a mature level, reducing the development and testing time by 33%. All told, cutting the time to market in half. That is a meaningful number for us. When we're in an environment where we need to be moving faster, designers and design thinking can help us get there. Forrester is finding that organizations interviewed in this study have experienced an ROI of more than 300% by applying design thinking. So this is important it's certainly important for me and for our program. I think it's a real indicator of how important design and design thinking is across industries, and most certainly in large established organizations. This is the evidence that those of us in the design industry have been confident of previously, but now we're starting to see the data. Our CEO, Ginny Rometty, is our biggest champion. She talks about design and design thinking more and more. She's a big believer and a big advocate for us. And I can't tell you how much that means to the success of our program. Oops, I'm not going to show that one. Got a little video there, but I think I'll close out there, and I know we're going to open it up for discussion with Dr. Wood, but I thank you for your time, and I hope I've given you a little bit of foundation for what we're doing here at IBM with our design and design thinking program. Thank you.
So we're going to have microphones come throughout the audience. and because we're recording, we'll wait till the microphone gets to you before I let you ask your question. While we're getting out there and you're getting ready to ask your questions, so you have to stand up or wave. It'd be preferable if you'd stand so we might be able to see you. It's a long way to the back. But the first question, you don't like the word user, you said. Your website on one of its early pages says we are not our users.
We are not our users.
Tell me about that.
I just think it's a weird word, and I think words are important, and in the tech industry, we've sort of, we've adopted a lexicon that we didn't invent, but we're stuck with, and I just think I think oftentimes we get used to using words. That's one example, but there are many that just become they lose their meaning. They certainly lose their humanity, and we as designers and the Monocle project that I showed you, and how much that design team was trying to reconnect with the people who were using their that product is evidence of really the important part of what we do as designers. It's not about users; it's about people.
So, in the middle, a microphone's coming from behind.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about the formal training that you alluded to in parts of your talk. Where do folks today, particularly the designers and the design team folks that you're hiring, where are some of the options for education and training in the field and at multiple levels, if you're aware of some of the leaders? Yeah,
it's a great question. It's a relatively new profession. I mean, especially when in contrast to the medical profession, which has a historic legacy. Design is less than 100 years old, really, as a defined profession. There is an increasingly established sort of academic programming and degree-oriented programming around design now. Certainly with graphic design, which has been an established profession and professional track for decades now, and so many of the academic programs kind of have their root in graphic or visual design. But now more and more of them are building programming in the user experience and research areas. And I know many of the designers here in the Center for Innovation have deep academic experience in those user experience and design research areas. We recruit globally. There are many great programs. In fact, the Upper Midwest is rich with really top-notch academic programs in some of the expected universities like the U of M. Iowa State has a great program, but also Minneapolis College of Art and Design. We recruit from RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, Savannah College of Art and Design. We recruit from Stanford, which has a great design thinking academic program. So it's really it's up and coming, but there's certainly a rich tier of academic programs now.
And we've also recruited from those institutions and others. And unfortunately, we've lost some of those that we've recruited to IBM. So, there are two of our prior employees who are working for IBM in design labs that I know of. There may be more, but at least two. Other questions? Where was it? Oh, yeah, okay. Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. Doug, excellent presentation. My question actually is for you, Dr. Wood. Doug referenced the idea of the designers not being sort of in one studio separate from the rest of the company. and more embedded is the term I'll use. You didn't necessarily say that, but how does that apply to the way you approach it at Mayo and CFI and other design thinking in this institution?
So in the Center for Innovation, we have design teams in Rochester as well as in Arizona and Florida. And we have been considered as an enterprise resource. So one of the ways that we have approached that is to try to use our design teams to achieve specific goals. Interestingly for us, sometimes the place makes a difference. I was really intrigued by the people of places. Rochester, for those of us here, it's a big place. And so sometimes to get something done takes a lot of work. It's easier for us sometimes to do certain projects in either Arizona or Florida. And then we can take the results of those and scale them back to the organization. Sometimes we do things there because it's easy to do, but we also discover that there are some substantial problems in scaling them up. We also share resources back and forth. So if there's a project that we need to do in one place and we don't have quite everybody we need in that one place, we will share those resources back and forth. Now, before we had the teams in Arizona and Florida, we would dispatch resources from Rochester, but now we actually share them back and forth, and we'll bring people from Arizona or Florida back to Rochester to do something. Sometimes we'll just send a project down there and say, you do all the work. So in our experience, our Florida team, for example, has recently completed a really fine piece of design work about pharmacogenomics. Our Arizona team has done a lot with how clinicians actually experience the interaction with the electronic record. So that kind of experience, I was trying to think of a good name we could make for that that would match monocle. But that's how we utilize our resources within the Center for Innovation. So we have teams that are spread across 3 sites. We have also learned the importance of co-creation. So from our perspective, when we're trying to do things, we want to be in the practice. So from the very beginning, the founding director of CFI, Nick LaRusso, said we've got to be in the practice. It does not help us to be in a skunk works off in some building somewhere. So that's why we exist right in the middle of the practice on Gonda 16, and it's why we've created a multidisciplinary design setting on Gonda 12. Because what we're looking for is the ability of our partners, that means our clinicians and others, to come to us where we can actually help them with the insights. Sometimes we like to say we help people discover the invisible, or making the invisible visible. And we often discover that the problem as stated is actually not going to be the problem as understood after we've spent a little bit of time working on the observational research. And we often say the work that's in the middle, that rapid prototyping that Doug showed, that's messy sometimes, but that's okay. That's what gets you to where you need to be. So that's how we actually do it.
I think in spirit, a lot of similarity. Being rooted in Gonda the way you are, having that close access to not only your colleagues and other project stakeholders, but the patient. We dream of that. At IBM, oftentimes our users, the people we're designing for, are very far removed from the design team. So it's always a challenge.
Here in the front.
Yeah, just one thing to support that question, and just to answer, I have been on a project team. I'm a senior business analyst, so we do operation changes, care, design. And just to support how Mayo utilizes CFI is, I was on a project where we redesigned the care, and that project, again, is going to be presented to national conferences this year. But I worked with the CFI designer, and I see her right here, Tracy, and the way CFI embeds designers is the way they paired a designer with us, where even the nursing team and a business analyst like myself, we learned so much about design thinking and how to think about the end user, the customer, or a patient. And we have seen so much patient satisfaction from that, embedding and bringing in that designer and checking that patient experience all the while we are designing that process. So I just support that Mayo is doing it, in my experience.
Other questions or comments? One of the challenges that we have, Doug, is that across Mayo, we have clinicians who work in practices and in laboratories, and they're always looking for solutions from their perspective, and they may not see where people need those solutions, and the challenge is to turn that laboratory discovery into something that helps people.
Yeah.
IBM, by one measure, is probably the most innovative company on the planet, and that's the number of patents.
Yes, we are.
But how does your design staff actually help translate those basic discoveries or patents into something that makes people's lives better?
That's exactly what we do. IBM is rich in that sort of deep technical innovation, but oftentimes, and I think the project I talked about is a great example of that, where essentially the technical team determined, we can do this. Like, we can do this so that it all happens with one. We can engineer that. So if we can, we must. That's sort of the engineer's mindset, right? If we can do it, then we have sort of a moral obligation to make it. And I think the design team in that case said, wait a second, just because we can do it, does that mean we should? And is there a compelling reason, a compelling human reason, that makes that a good idea? And in fact, what they found was that it was a compellingly bad reason, and quite the opposite.
Dr. Limper?
Very fascinating, stimulating talk. You talked about, accelerating and changing the culture, and certainly a key factor in that is having the absolute buy-in of the CEO of the organization. But you talked about growing up your design staff and the size. And is there a recipe or a formula or even thoughts on how much of that design size you need to actually transform the culture? Because then you go out and you get these second wave of design thinkers that are more, further down the pipe, but they're not formally trained.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that?
Well, I mentioned the 1,600 number, the number between 1,500 and 2,000. That was actually, as I mentioned, it was based on a ratio. Our ratio is one designer to basically 16 engineers. Is the ratio that we worked with to get to that 1,500 to 2,000. That was very clear. Now we also made a very calculated choice about how fast we would get to that number, and it's now looking back on it, a very important one. We had a choice to make of either very slowly growing up to that number over, say, the course of a decade or so, or doing it as fast as we could. Now, we knew in 2012 and 2013, as we were launching the program, that there isn't a lot of patience for transformation in a big company. And we knew that if 8, 9 years, 10 years later, we were still, asking for the investment to continue to grow, that there's a pretty good chance that the story would change by then. So we really compressed our growth into essentially we reached that number in 4 years. And that was a very important choice because, honestly, now in year 5, we're under a lot more pressure to prove our outcomes, which is why the Forrester report is so important for us, because that's some key data for us.
So we'll talk about budgets a little bit later. Back here.
Yep. Thank you so much for the talk. So you've mentioned design as disruptive. So by applying new findings to the current process, I know Mayo is very interdisciplinary team as a EHR records. Many people, doctors, nurses, work on the same system. And so since it's disruptive, so we have findings, and when we want to adapt these findings, it's very hard and challenging to actually leverage these design findings to real practice. Do you have any advice for like Mayo with like very multidisciplinary or both stakeholders?
That's a scenario that we're faced with, as you can imagine, almost verbatim at IBM over and over again. We work with our teams. Oftentimes, what a design team or a collaborative design thinking team will come to in the first sort of their first big idea will be a big idea, like a just deeply disruptive idea. And it's not realistic. It's not realistic to build that big idea. And the disruption that you're talking about is too much for the organization right away. And so we work with our team, and I'm sure that the CFI team has some tactics for this that are similar to this, but we have what we call an experience-based roadmap. So we work with that team to say, okay, over the course of 2 years, what are we incrementally going to be doing to build toward this big idea that we've got? And the metaphor that we use for this, and I know it's not original to us, but the metaphor that we use is the big idea is the wedding cake, and what we need to build first is the cupcake. And then we'll build a birthday cake, and then we'll build the wedding cake. And each time, the important thing about the cupcake is a complete and delightful experience. It's just smaller, and it's easier to build, and it's less disruptive to use your scenario. We're learning from that, and then we're learning enough that we can build a great birthday cake, and then et cetera, et cetera. But importantly, we're not delivering a grocery bag full of eggs and flour and sugar. We're making all of that into an experience, to extend the metaphor, even in its smallest iteration. A little design thinking 101 there.
We have about 2 minutes left, and I don't see any other questions. I'm going to finish with one. So one of our great challenges in design and the Center for Innovation is that handoff of the scalable prototype to make sure that the implementation can happen as fast as possible. And within our organization, forever, it has been that the implementation, once we hand it off to the organization, takes at least as long, if not twice as long, as the process of designing it. Have you encountered the same circumstance, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, we have in different ways in different parts of our business that move at different cadences. Our hardware business is on what we would call a release cycle of, oftentimes 18 to 24 months, before they can release a new version of their product. Our cloud-based software products are releasing every week. They're on a very rapid iteration cycle and release cycle. So it's different answers in different cases, and the handoff that you describe is different in both of those. Now, I will say that having those designers embedded in that cross-disciplinary development team minimizes the trauma of the handoff. They're there, they're essentially, I'm overstating, but there is no handoff because they're there as a permanent member of that team. So that, it at least mitigates the problem that you're describing.
Very good. Well, it's now 1 o'clock, and I know many of you have other things to go to. Thank you again for coming for this conversation. I hope that you found the discussion stimulating one, and will begin to change your experience, and maybe we'll begin to convert some of you to design thinking as part of the way you do your work. We're Obviously, at the Center for Innovation, very thrilled that you'd spend part of your day with us and hope that this has been for you very productive. And I want to thank Doug also for a very provocative presentation and a wonderful day together with you earlier in the CFI. So thank you very much.
Thank you.